The scream that echoed across the courtyard wasn't heard until it was far too late, because by then, Emily Carter's body was already lying still on the cold pavement below. Just 24 hours earlier, Emily was alive, terrified, and desperately trying to escape a man who had wrapped his influence around her like a tightening rope. Emily Carter, 24, lived in a small apartment in downtown Brookhaven, a modest place tucked between a bakery and a laundromat. She worked as a part-time receptionist at a dental office, spent most evenings drawing in her sketchbook, and called her sister almost every night. Her life was simple, quiet, and, until recently, happy. Everything changed the day she met Henry Whitmore. Henry was powerful. Influential. The kind of man whose voice could silence a room, whose grin could charm anyone into compliance. At 46, he owned several real estate developments across the city, sat on charity boards, and regularly appeared in glossy local magazines. To everyone else, he was generous and respectable. To Emily, he became a nightmare. Their connection began when Emily worked a temporary reception shift at one of Henry's offices. He noticed her immediately, her soft voice, her kindness, the way she apologized too often. He praised her, complimented her, made her feel seen. And when he asked for her number, she was too polite to decline. The messages began innocently at first. "You looked lovely today. I'd like to see you again." But Henry's tone changed quickly. The compliments became demands. The kindness became control. And soon, Emily found herself receiving messages she never wanted, explicit, threatening, filled with a pressure she didn't understand until it was already too late. One night, after refusing to meet him, Henry sent her the photo. A private photo of her, one she had taken in confidence and shared only once, years ago, with a former boyfriend. She didn't know how Henry got it. She didn't want to know. He promised more would accidentally surface if she disobeyed him again. From that moment on, fear became her daily companion. He tracked her movements. Appeared outside her workplace. Left voicemails telling her what she should wear when she saw him. He would show up unannounced, grip her wrist hard enough to leave marks, and whisper threats no one else ever heard. For months, Emily lived in a world where daylight offered no comfort and nightfall made breathing difficult. She tried to end it. She tried to block the messages, avoid the places he frequented, change her routes home. But Henry always found a way back into her life, as if her boundaries were merely suggestions. Finally, after a night of shaking and sleeplessness, Emily walked into the local precinct. Her voice trembled as she explained everything, every message, every threat, every bruise hidden beneath her sleeves. She even brought her medical report from the clinic, documenting the injuries she suffered during one of Henry's reminders. The officers listened, typed notes, reassured her they would look into it. But nothing happened. No immediate arrest. No protective order. No follow-up call. Emily left the building with a sinking feeling, she was still alone. And Henry knew it. She went home that night exhausted but determined to keep herself safe. She locked her windows, checked her doors twice, and curled up on the couch with her sketchbook open but untouched. By morning, her neighbors would find police tape around the courtyard. And investigators would be left with a single question. Did Emily Carter jump, or was she pushed, inch by inch, by the man who held her life in his hands? The morning after Emily's desperate visit to the police station, she moved through her apartment like a ghost. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hands trembling each time her phone lit up, even with harmless notifications. She hadn't slept. Fear had taken whatever energy she had left. She tried to distract herself by cleaning, opening windows, making tea she never drank. But nothing eased the knot inside her chest. By noon, her phone buzzed. Not once. Not twice. But over a dozen times. When she finally picked it up, her stomach dropped. Henry. The messages came rapid fire, like bullets. You think you can embarrass me? You think anyone will help you? You're mine. You'll stay mine. If you run, I'll destroy you. Then one final message, colder, shorter, more terrifying than the rest. Tonight. Don't make me come find you. Emily's breath caught. He knew she'd gone to the police. Someone must have told him. Or maybe he simply assumed she would try. Either way, he was furious. And fury made him dangerous. She spent the next hours pacing, checking the peephole, jumping every time footsteps sounded in the hall. She called her sister but hung up before the line connected. She didn't want to worry her family, not when she still hoped she could handle this on her own. By late afternoon, she forced herself to leave her apartment. She needed fresh air. She needed space. Emily walked to a nearby cafe, choosing a corner table where she could see both exits. She kept her bag close, her eyes constantly sweeping the room. Every unfamiliar face made her pulse spike. She reached into her purse and pulled out her small journal, the place where she wrote everything she couldn't say aloud. The pages were filled with dated entries about Henry, what he said, what he did, how she felt trapped in a life she no longer recognized. She flipped to a blank page and wrote 4 words in a shaky hand. I'm scared of him. Before she could write more, someone called her name. Emily? She jerked upright. It wasn't Henry, it was a coworker from the dental office, Rachel, holding a cup of coffee and looking concerned. Are you okay? You look really pale. Emily forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Just tired. Rachel didn't buy it. You sure? You can talk to me, you know. For a moment, Emily nearly confessed everything. The harassment, the threats, the feeling of being hunted. But she swallowed the words. Fear sealed her lips. I'm fine, she whispered. Rachel hesitated, then nodded gently. Just, take care of yourself, okay? I will. But she knew she wouldn't. Not really. Not until someone stopped Henry. As the sun dipped below the buildings, Emily returned home and double-checked every lock again. She sat on her couch, hugging her knees, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. Hours passed. Then, just after midnight, her phone lit up once more. A photo appeared. This time, it wasn't of her. It was her apartment building. Taken from the street below. Followed by a second message. Open the door. I know you're awake. Emily's heart pounded so violently she felt dizzy. She covered her mouth with her hand to stop herself from making a sound. Then came the knock. A slow, deliberate knock that echoed through her entire apartment. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She just stared at the door, praying he would go away. The knock came again. Louder this time. Then. Silence. A long, suffocating silence. Minutes passed, 5, 10, 20. Eventually, Emily crawled toward the window, peered through the curtain, and saw no one. But she also saw something else. A small piece of paper tucked under her door, its corner barely visible. She didn't dare pick it up. Not yet. Because deep down, Emily Carter already sensed the truth. This was only the beginning. The next morning, the neighbors gathered behind yellow tape, whispering as investigators documented the courtyard below Emily's building. Officers moved with careful precision, speaking in low voices as they photographed the scene. Emily's body had been found just after dawn by an elderly resident walking her dog. The woman's panicked screams echoed up the brick walls, pulling half the tenants from their apartments. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. Emily lay motionless, her hair spread like a dark halo around her head, her clothes rumpled from the fall. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic suicide. But that assumption didn't last long. Detective Laura Hayes arrived shortly after EMTs pronounced Emily dead. At 37, Hayes was known for her calm demeanor and unyielding attention to detail. She crouched beside the body, studying the angle of the fall, the position of Emily's limbs, the faint marks around her wrists, subtle, but unmistakable. She straightened slowly. Something's wrong here. Inside the building, Hayes entered Emily's apartment with a pair of crime scene technicians. The place was tidy, almost painfully neat. A tea mug sat untouched on the coffee table. A sketchbook lay open on the couch, its last page filled with dark, frantic strokes of charcoal. On the floor near the door, the slip of paper Emily had feared the night before remained where she last saw it. Hayes slid on gloves and lifted it carefully. A single sentence was written across it in thick, aggressive pen strokes. "You belong to me. You always will." No signature. No name. But the message wasn't vague, not to anyone who truly knew Emily's life in her final months. As technicians continued their sweep, Hayes found Emily's journal tucked inside her bag. She flipped through the entries, her eyes narrowing with each page. March 8th, he took my phone and went through everything. I couldn't stop him. April 15th, he says he'll ruin me if I tell anyone. May 2nd, I think he's watching my building. June 11th, I told the police. They said they'd look into it. Nothing's changed. June 12th, I'm so tired of being scared. The final entry was written hours before Emily died. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Hayes exhaled sharply. Definitely not a suicide. As she dug deeper, Hayes requested officer notes from the previous day, and found Emily's harassment report. It was brief, lacking detail, filed quickly by the officer who'd spoken to her. No follow-up scheduled. No emergency alert issued. Hayes clenched her jaw. She continued her investigation by interviewing neighbors. Most said they'd heard nothing unusual. But one tenant, a college student named Daniel, mentioned something chilling. I heard knocking around midnight. Really loud. Like someone banging on her door. Did you see who? He hesitated. No. But. I heard a voice. A man's voice. Low. Angry. Did you recognize it? Another long pause. Then. I think it was Henry Whitmore. The name sent a ripple through the investigation team. Henry was already known in certain circles, wealthy, influential, difficult to touch. But this was the first time someone had placed him at Emily's door the night she died. When Hayes requested his number and checked Emily's phone records, the pattern was unmistakable. Dozens of messages. Unanswered calls. Threatening voicemails. And then, after 12:04 a.m., a sudden, eerie silence. Hayes stared at the timestamp. Just hours before she was found. As the pieces fell into place, investigators accessed Emily's cloud backups. There, they found screen captures, messages she had saved out of fear they'd be erased. Some were manipulative. Some were desperate. Others were violent. One read. "One day, you'll push me too far. And you won't like what happens next." Hayes closed the file and called the chief. "This isn't a suicide," she said firmly. "This is coercion. This is control. This is a man who hunted her until she broke, or until he made sure she didn't survive." The chief sighed heavily. "And the suspect?" Hayes didn't hesitate. "Henry Whitmore." And with that, the investigation shifted, from a routine death scene to a criminal case poised to uncover the darkest corners of power, manipulation, and a young woman's final hours. Detective Laura Hayes didn't waste a second. By the following morning, she secured a warrant to search Henry Whitmore's primary office, an immaculate corner suite overlooking the city. His receptionist, startled to see investigators sweeping through the lobby, kept nervously adjusting her glasses as she watched them pass. Inside Henry's office, Hayes immediately noticed the curated perfection. Not a paper out of place. Not a single personal item on the desk except a framed award declaring him Businessman of the Year. The man's ego filled the room long before his presence did. While forensic technicians combed through devices and documents, Hayes examined the walls, sleek shelves filled with binders labeled with property names, investment portfolios, and charity fund reports. Everything looked legitimate. But Hayes' new appearances meant nothing. "Detective," one of the techs called. "You'll want to see this." He held up a sleek black smartphone, the one Henry used for business. Hidden in a folder marked innocently as "Receipts," investigators found screenshots of private images of Emily. Hayes felt her pulse tighten. There were timestamps, metadata, and message trails linking Henry to several accounts that had contacted Emily over the past months, accounts he had clearly tried to disguise behind layers of anonymity. "He kept everything," Hayes murmured. "Like trophies." But what unsettled her even more were the audio files. Voicemails Henry had sent to Emily, saved automatically in the cloud. She listened to a short clip. His voice was low, controlled, chilling. "If you think anyone will save you from me, you're mistaken. You made yourself mine the day you answered my message." Hayes stopped the recording halfway through. "That's enough." The tech nodded grimly. "There's more." Meanwhile, across town, other detectives interviewed witnesses who might have seen Henry that night. A security guard at a nearby parking structure confirmed he'd seen a familiar luxury sedan shortly after midnight, matching Henry's vehicle. The guard didn't see the driver, but he noted something strange. The car was parked for maybe 20 minutes. No one got out. No one walked away. It was just sitting there. Lights off. Engine off. Like someone was waiting for something. Hayes added the detail to her growing timeline. Back at headquarters, she requested a voluntary interview with Henry. To her surprise, he agreed, almost eagerly. When he walked into the room, he wore a navy suit and a composed smile, as if attending a business lunch rather than a police inquiry. His confidence radiated off him, filling the room before he even sat down. "Detective Hayes," he greeted smoothly. "I understand there's been a terrible tragedy. But I assure you, I had nothing to do with it." Hayes studied him carefully. "We're still gathering information." Henry intertwined his fingers. "Emily was troubled. Fragile. I tried to help her." Hayes nearly flinched at the phrasing, but she kept her expression neutral. "Is that how you would describe the threats you sent her?" Henry blinked, caught off guard for the first time. "Threats? I never." "We have your messages," Hayes cut in quietly. "The photos. The voicemails." A flicker of irritation crossed his features. "Detective, Emily misinterpreted things. She exaggerated. She imagined danger where there was none." He said the words with casual ease, as though gaslighting were second nature. "Tell me where you were last night," Hayes said. "At home." "Any witnesses?" "My security system logs my arrival." "Convenient," Hayes replied. "Because the timestamp shows your car leaving your residence around midnight. You didn't return until 1:37 a.m. Henry's jaw tightened. "I went for a drive." "Near Emily's building?" His silence was answer enough. Hayes leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, Emily filed a harassment report against you yesterday." Henry's lips curled slightly. Something dark slid into his expression. "She shouldn't have done that," he murmured. Hayes exhaled slowly. "And now she's dead." For the first time, the mask slipped. Just for a second. A flash of cold fury. Possessiveness. Entitlement. Then, just like that, Henry replaced it with a polished smile. Detective Hayes, if you're trying to accuse me of something, you'll need real evidence, not emotional guesses. But Hayes already had it. The final piece came when officers reviewing nearby surveillance discovered footage from a storefront across the street from Emily's apartment. Just after midnight, a tall man in a tailored coat walked toward her building, and left 20 minutes later. He kept his head down, hood up. But one frame, just one, caught his face as he turned toward the streetlight. Henry Whitmore. Hayes paused the footage, staring at the still image. "This is the turn," she whispered. This was the moment the case stopped being speculation and became undeniable. Detective Laura Hayes knew the moment she saw Henry's face illuminated in that grainy security frame that the balance of the case had shifted. What had begun as suspicion was now crystallizing into hard evidence. For the first time, Henry Whitmore no longer stood untouchable. That afternoon, Hayes presented her findings to the district attorney. The timeline, the threats, the recordings, the surveillance, all of it formed a chain that pointed straight to Henry's door. By evening, a judge signed the warrant for his arrest. When officers arrived at Henry's estate, he opened the door wearing the same cultivated composure he'd flaunted during the interview. But the moment he saw the handcuffs, something inside him cracked. "This is absurd," he hissed. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Hayes met his stare evenly. "Yes. And you're under arrest for the coercion and death of Emily Carter." For the first time, Henry didn't speak. He simply gritted his teeth as the cuffs clicked into place. The trial began 4 months later, drawing enormous attention. Reporters flooded the courthouse steps, their voices echoing over the stone facade. In the courtroom, Henry sat beside his high-profile defense team, expensive suits, confident smirks, polished speeches. They framed Emily as unstable, emotional, a young woman overwhelmed by her own imagination. But the prosecution had come prepared. They began with Emily's journal. Entry after entry was read aloud, her voice brought back through ink and fear. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecutor recited her final message: "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident." Then came the digital evidence, hundreds of messages from Henry. Photos he threatened to release. Audio recordings dripping with control and menace. Each piece tore apart the facade Henry had built. The prosecution called neighbors, co-workers, medical professionals. The doctor who examined Emily's bruises. The officer who took her initial report, embarrassed, now, by how little had been done. The security guard who witnessed Henry's car near the building the night she died. And finally, Daniel, the college student who heard the angry knock. "I recognized the voice," he said, avoiding Henry's glare. It was him. Henry's lawyers tried to frame everything as jealousy, exaggeration, coincidence. But the final blow came when the prosecution presented the footage, Henry approaching Emily's building at 12:11 a.m. He looked up at her window. He waited. Then he disappeared inside. The jury watched every second. Henry's confidence withered. His posture slumped. His eyes lost their spark of superiority. For the first time in his life, power didn't protect him. In closing arguments, the prosecutor said, "Emily Carter did not fall because she wanted to die. She fell because she had been pushed to the edge by a man who controlled, threatened, and terrorized her until she saw no way out. The law calls this culpability. The people call it cruelty. But Emily's journal calls it by its real name, fear." The jury deliberated for 9 hours. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. "Guilty," the foreperson announced. "Guilty on all counts." Henry stared ahead, expression blank, as though the world had suddenly stopped making sense. His lawyers whispered urgently, to no avail. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. For the coercion, psychological manipulation, and sustained threats that resulted in the death of Emily Carter, she said, "You will spend the rest of your days behind bars." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. And for the first time since her death, it felt as though Emily's voice had finally been heard. The courthouse steps were quiet by the time the verdict settled over the city like evening fog. Reporters had packed up, supporters dispersed, and the sound of camera shutters faded into the background. Yet for many, the weight of the trial lingered, heavy, sobering, unforgettable. Detective Laura Hayes watched from a distance as Emily Carter's sister, Anna, stood beside their mother. The two women held each other tightly, their breaths shaky with a mixture of grief and relief. Justice had been served, but justice could never bring Emily back. Hayes stepped forward, offering a gentle nod. "She would be proud," Hayes said softly. Anna swallowed hard. She just wanted to live her life, without fear. Hayes nodded. "And because she spoke up, even when no one listened, other women will be heard." There was truth in that. In the weeks after Emily's death, public outrage ignited across Brookhaven. Advocacy groups pushed for reform, demanding better handling of harassment reports, stronger protective measures, and mandatory review when victims reported threats accompanied by physical evidence. Emily's case, once a quiet tragedy, became a catalyst for change. The precinct that had once dismissed her plea instituted new training protocols. Officers were taught to recognize digital coercion as seriously as physical violence. Schools and workplaces across the city created awareness seminars. Local news stations aired investigative segments about patterns of manipulation and emotional control. Emily's name was the spark that lit it all. In prison, Henry Whitmore adjusted poorly to life without influence. His privileges were gone, his assistants gone, his polished reputation erased. Other inmates recognized him from the news, and the staff treated him like any other offender. He spent his days in the quiet monotony of a cell that could not be charmed, bullied, or bought. The power he once held slipped through his fingers like dust. Back in Brookhaven, the courtyard where Emily was found became a memorial of sorts. Neighbors placed flowers at the base of the building every year on her birthday. A local artist painted a small mural on the brick wall, a silhouette of a young woman surrounded by soft beams of sunrise. Below it were the words. Her voice still echoes. Anna visited often. Sometimes she sat quietly on the bench, simply listening to the wind rustle through the leaves. Other times, she spoke aloud to Emily, telling her about new jobs, new friendships, and small victories she wished her sister could have celebrated with her. And gradually, the city moved forward. But it never forgot. Detective Hayes, assigned by then to another high-profile case, kept one object from the investigation locked in her desk drawer, the small journal Emily had written, digitally transcribed, its original pages preserved and returned to her family. Hayes kept her own copy of the final entry, not out of morbid habit, but because it reminded her why she fought so hard for every victim. One evening, after closing yet another long case, she sat at her desk and reread those last lines. "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident." Hayes closed the notebook and exhaled. Emily's words weren't just prophetic, they were a plea for the world to do better. And, in many ways, it finally had. Emily had been terrified, cornered, unheard. But she wasn't forgotten. In the end, Emily Carter's story became more than just a tragedy. It became a reminder that danger often hides behind charm, power, and silence, and that every voice trembling with fear deserves to be taken seriously. Justice came too late to save her life. But it came in time to ensure her truth lived on. And sometimes, that truth is the only light that can break the darkest shadows.